Hello, and welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm your host, Kathy Healey, along with my co-host, Emmy Macri. On today's show, we're going to be talking about one of the most devastating fires the town of Wakefield has ever seen, along with Fire Chief Michael Sullivan and Reverend Norm Bendroth. The fire I'm referring to is that of the First Baptist Church back in October of 2018. Reverend, thank you for coming on the show. Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, my condolences to you and your parishioners, and how are you doing today?
We're doing fine. No, very resilient congregation. They've been amazingly positive and coming out of this. Of course, it was devastating. At the time, I was all set that night. I was going to leave for Salt Lake City the next day, 6:30 in the morning, to go hiking in some slot canyons with my friends when I got a call from one of our council members that lightning had struck the church and that she thought it was on fire. Of course, when I got up there, by the time I hit the Galvin middle school, I mean, there's a fireball in the sky. And then when I walked up from there, because I didn't know how close I could get, but by then it had gone up like a torch. You know, the roof had collapsed and the steeple was like a candle. I mean, it was just amazing. My clergy colleagues were wonderful because they called me on the way up and they said, "Where are you?" And they said, "Meet us at the War Memorial." So they were great because I'd only started there in July. And I didn't, of course, have the emotional attachment to the building that most of the folks did. So my heart broke as many had been there, you know, most of their lives, you know, 40 plus years.
So it was a lightning strike.
Yes.
Was there a lightning rod on the church?
Yeah, there were.
Okay.
And maybe Chief Sullivan can speak to that. My understanding is hit the base of the steeple. Is there any way to know that?
Well, the first place we actually spotted the fire was near the base of the steeple.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say exactly where it started, but
Right.
that's where we saw it initially. So.
And it did have a lightning rod on it.
It did. They're typically very high up on
Yeah.
the steeple, though. So I'm not sure if the lightning just hit it lower on the steeple or what exactly happened. But
And Chief, tell us a little bit about the weather that evening and how it affected you in the fire.
well, a storm front had come through, a pretty violent thunder and lightning storm. And I remember hearing the thunder and thinking, you know, geez, I hope that didn't hit anything. And not to make light of it, but that's what goes through your brain when you have a thunder and lightning storm like that. And shortly after the storm passed through, like within a minute or two, I heard them being dispatched out, and they on arrival they were only a minute away, and on arrival they spotted that small fire at the base of the steeple, and immediately attempted to gain entry to the church. They actually didn't even take the time to get the key out of the box. They forced the front door because they were pretty alarmed by the fact that the fire had started in the steeple. Traditionally, once a fire hits a church steeple, it's very, very difficult to extinguish it. So they were trying to get in, you know, quickly.
Why is that?
It's just the height. It's very inaccessible. They often go beyond the reach of a standard hose line.
Oh, okay.
And by the time you get like a ladder truck up and raised and in position, it's too late. They're very old structures. The wood's very dry, and it spreads phenomenally fast.
And there are no sprinkler systems in there because the church is probably grandfathered in.
Yeah, well, it's 146 years old.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
built in 1872.
Yeah,
And there were three like it in the North Shore area, and that was the last one that went down. The architect designed built three of them that were identical.
And
You know,
unfortunately, it's a common end for a building like that.
Yeah, and it's the thing is that it was an icon. As you know, I mean, I found out that it's really the skyline of Wakefield, and you can see it from 95, from 93.
And it's
Yes,
on our Talk of the
right.
Town.
Yeah,
right there.
right
We have
there.
a picture of it right
Right
there.
there.
Yes, beautiful church. Yeah. So, Chief, tell us about the heat in the burning embers and how it affected the surrounding. I know Artichokes is right beside there, and homes.
Well, yeah, the fire started about 7 o'clock at night, just after that front came through, and it stopped raining right after that
Right.
front blew through. So a couple of things happened in our favor. One is that it was pouring out during a thunder and lightning storm, so it had the effect of wetting down thoroughly all the roofs of the adjoining buildings, which didn't unfortunately help the church too much, but it did help us with we call them exposures. The wind died down almost to a calm, which was tremendously helpful to us, because if the wind had been blowing even a little bit in any direction, whatever direction the wind was blowing in, we probably would have lost the building.
Wow.
So
Wow.
we probably would have come really. I'm still amazed that Artichokes pulled through as
Yeah.
well as
I
it
know,
did.
it is amazing.
It's the closest structure, and it really was in a position to absorb a tremendous amount of heat from that church. And so we had the calm wind conditions, and the fact that it rained, and those are the two probably biggest things in our favor.
How hot do you think those flames got?
Well, I mean, I'm sure, anywhere near the fire it's probably several hundred degrees, even a few feet from the church, but it was probably over at least 1,000 degrees,
Wow.
inside.
People
So
said they could feel the heat.
yeah.
While they were standing like a block away, they could feel the intense heat from it.
Well, even with the fact that there was no wind and it was calm conditions, the fire was generating thousands of burning embers, and fortunately they were going straight up.
Okay.
And then kind of like drifting and then falling down on the surrounding property. And then radiant heat, we call it, would go off equally in every direction. So that was pretty much, again, if the wind was blowing on a structure, it would have made it worse, and more heat would have ended up on that structure. It was kind of like evenly heating everything around it.
And how difficult was it to get water to the fire?
Actually, we're very blessed. Wakefield has a very good water system. And fortunately, where the common is not that far from the square, downtown Wakefield has a 20-inch water main that runs right through the middle of Main Street. And that's a huge water main. And we had access to large quantities of water because of the size of the main. So once we had enough fire equipment there to tap into enough hydrants and actually start flowing a large quantity of water, that actually was in our benefit. Because I had people ask me afterwards, why didn't you draft water from Lake Quannapowitt? And we didn't need to. The DPW, we have, a lot of people don't realize it, but the MWRA supplies Wakefield with its water supply, but Crystal Lake is like a backup water supply for Wakefield, and it's a pumping station right on Broadway
Right.
at Crystal Lake, and there's huge pumps in there. And at a very early stage in the fire, somebody from the water department had come up to me and said, "Hey, Chief, we turned the pumps on." So in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, any drop in pressure we have is gonna be made up now from those pumps running. So it was just a matter of just hooking up, enough hydrants and getting enough water flowing.
How much water do you think you used altogether?
I had a lot of people ask me that, and I started out with 1 million, and I thought about it, and I'm like, I don't think that's approaching it. And I want to say about the best answer I could give you is in excess of 5 million gallons.
Oh my goodness.
And that's a rough calculation, judging from the number of streams that we were playing on the church and the surrounding buildings, and just a rough calculation of how many gallons per minute that those flow. They flow between 500 and 1,000 gallons a minute. And
Oh
there
my
was
goodness.
probably
Per hose?
20, 25 anyway,
Oh, wow.
lines
Wow.
going.
And speaking of that, how many towns
Right.
actually came and helped?
Well, we ended up transmitting 7 alarms for the fire. And a lot of people don't understand what that means. A first alarm assignment for our community is 2 engines and a ladder truck, and the captain's in a separate car. So when the Captain Pronko, who was the first officer, the shift officer on scene, when he called for a second alarm, that automatically called 3 engines and a ladder to the fire and 2 engines and a ladder to cover. in case we had something else. And every additional alarm that was struck brought 3 engines and a ladder to the fire, and replaced the apparatus that responded from headquarters with 2 engines and a ladder. So we ended up with 21 engines and 7 ladder trucks.
And how many towns were involved?
About 21, 22.
Oh my goodness!
Wow, that's
I didn't realize
amazing.
that.
So, and all that's automatic. It's all on a run card. So if I call back and said, I need a 5th alarm, all the departments already knew who was being dispatched on the 5th alarm, and it's a very efficient system. And obviously, it worked very well at the fire.
How long did it take to put out?
It really burned the majority, the main body of the church. It was a huge structure of very old dry wood, probably 6-7 hours.
Oh my God.
And then after that, it was still a large fire, but it had sort of like sunk in on itself. And so we just had to keep it from extending. But I don't believe they cleared until 3 in the morning.
Wow.
And how was this fire comparable to the St. Joseph's Church fire back in the 70s?
Well, I can't answer being an employee of the fire department when the St. Joseph's Church burned, because
Yeah.
it was in the late 70s.
Yeah.
But being a resident of Wakefield,
Yes.
there was a lot of similarities. They're both beautiful churches.
Yes.
Woodwork was very ornate, and both buildings.
Yeah.
Both of them were very popular churches. They had very active congregations with lots of groups in them, and so forth. And really, the same mourning process for the building took place after both fires.
Yeah. Speaking of that, Reverend, where do the parishioners go now?
Well, we're currently meeting at First Parish Congregational, right on the
Okay.
lake, the stone building
Church.
on Church Street, and they have an interim minister there too. I'm the interim minister.
Okay.
That's what I do for a calling. This is my 11th church that I've served as an interim. But anyway, he invited us over the next day to use their chapel, and it fits us perfectly.
Oh, good.
And they created an office for me, really nice space. We share the fellowship hall because they worship simultaneously. So we share coffee hour together. So it's really been a wonderful relationship.
Nice.
And the whole town has, particularly that first week, came out in droves. I mean, we got money, we got well wishes, we got letters, cards, money from all around the country. We've had to write close to 190 thank you notes.
Wow.
From
Because it is a
people.
grieving process.
Right.
I mean, you really were there
course.
to
Yeah.
help this parish grieve a tremendous loss.
Well, that night there were probably about a dozen parishioners that were gathered around watching it, and Mary Miller, who's the executive director of what's called TABCOM, the American Baptist Churches in Massachusetts, she drove out from Groton and she met us there, which I thought was a wonderful pastoral act, and she had prayer with us because I am ordained in the United Church of Christ, which is congregational, but at American Baptist or kissing cousins. So, and I live in Melrose, and it was a great opportunity to stay close to home and do this work. But little did I realize that,
Yeah.
because I have 2 books on interministry, and I didn't have a chapter on what to do when your church burns down. So
Well, now you do.
Now you do, yeah.
Now you do.
Now, what about the school that's housed in there?
Unfortunately, we want to have them back, and they want to come back too. They've tried a number of places, schools that are closed, and it was the lead conditions that prevented it. But now they're is it the Heart Insurance Building, I believe?
Hartshorn, yeah.
Oh,
in the
okay.
Heart, in the basement. And they're doing well. I mean, of course, it was a heartache, for them as well, and they've been tenants for ages in the church, but we hope that they will come back. I know they want to.
Yeah. Now, one question that made national news is that the picture of Jesus that we all want to know.
I know. How did that survive?
How did that survive?
Well, if you're looking at me, I don't.
I
don't have an official
yeah.
I don't have an official explanation for how that survived. To be honest
Maybe
with
the
you,
Reverend does.
Well, I wonder
Yeah, I
if,
would defer to the
well,
Reverend.
would it be, I'm speculating here that it hit the base of the steeple and the fire went back, and so the foyer was somewhat protected?
I really don't have a good
speculation.
answer for you. I did see the picture, and it was in remarkable condition
Yeah.
after a
It's
fire of
it's
that
got a
size.
bit of water stains on it, and then it's got ashes. It needs to be cleaned up. But it was a painting that someone had commissioned and was donated to the church. It was hanging in the foyer. I don't know if it had a whole lot of sentimental value. No, it certainly wasn't a Michelangelo, but it was a sign of hope, of course,
Right.
that this had been spared. This is a memory of the church. And people, I mean, I'm usually, this is not my piety, but people took photos of the fire in the steeple, and there was a pretty close image of Jesus that represented that painting. You know, it was kind of spooky.
Right.
You know, then we had a rainbow over the church the next
Yeah.
day.
I remember that.
Yes,
you
I
know?
remember that.
And it was interesting because there was somebody had posted a picture almost the day before of a beautiful
Yeah,
rainbow
yeah.
over it
Yes.
before it happened
Yeah.
as well.
And so we had an emergency meeting the next night, one of our parishioners' homes, and someone had taken a picture of the rainbow over the church and reproduced it because, you know, that's a sign of hope in this
Right.
after the story of Noah. You know,
Yeah.
promise I will never flood the earth again, just flood
Okay.
the church. You know.
Oh. Now there were a lot of people there, Fire Chief Sullivan. So how did that affect you guys putting out the fire? And did it help when a lot of them photographed and videotaped the fire and process? And were you able to look at any of those videotapes after the fire to help you?
Well, first of all, in terms of the spectators, I'll be completely honest with you. I was so absorbed with the fire at the time that I had no idea or no concept of how many people were around
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
watching. I was pretty focused on saving what we could, you know, and all that.
Yeah, my colleagues brought me over to Chief Sullivan to introduce me, and he said, "Nice to meet you, but I got to go. I got to keep the steeple from falling down."
Yeah, I actually felt pretty badly
Oh,
after that.
Well, that was,
I'd
but
rather
that's
have
your
you do
job.
Yeah.
But it was kind of heartwarming to me because you were flanked on either side. I know Reverend Mortimer was one of them.
Right, Glenn and Matthew Caldwell from the Episcopal Church.
That was kind of heartbreaking for me because I'm like, oh, this poor man, what's he going through? And at the time I was very distracted, I was really very amazed. If you want to talk about a miracle, I was really amazed at how strong that steeple was.
Yeah, so you're telling me.
It withstood quite a bit of heat, and I mean the structural members on that were holding that thing up were very substantial. But I was pretty concerned about that falling and where it was going to go. But the other part of the question you asked me was people took hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of the church, which really didn't help us determine the cause of it because although we're very confident that it was lightning, I mean, all those pictures were after the fact, basically. But it did serve to document, a lot of other things. But yeah, there were hundreds, several hundred anyway.
Now, the bell fell from the
It
ceiling.
fell, yeah, that was a
Into the-
180-foot
Oh my
tall
gosh.
steeple. We had a hard time getting steeplejacks to go up there because it was so tall. Of course, T-Mobile loved it because it was a great cell tower. But no, I didn't see it fall. Some people did, but it went straight down to the basement. And when we started excavating it, they discovered the bell. It's full of fractures, and a big chunk of it came out. But we are contemplating when we rebuild of having like a granite base from the front steps and having that as kind of a memorial.
That'd be nice.
That's very nice.
Yeah. And we
That's-
also found our archives, and we found boxes and boxes of records that went back to the turn of the 19th century, the original deed and so forth. Unfortunately, most of them were soaked and moldy, but we were able to save enough archives that we're sending them to the Northeast Document Restoration Company up in Andover.
Oh, nice.
And I didn't realize they existed. I also found out they're dry cleaners that have special rooms to get smoke out of robes.
That's
So,
good.
steep learning curve working with an insurance adjuster.
Now, speaking of rebuilding, you're going to rebuild right on that
Well,
same.
we're still in contemplation because the reality of the situation was like too many of our churches, that was an aging, shrinking congregation. that building could hold 750
It
people.
was very large.
Yeah. So we're having serious conversations. I know that the town wants us to rebuild, and I think in the heart of hearts, people do. But there's a lot of questions that we have to ask. One of them is just, what's our purpose? What's our mission? You build a structure to support that. And the other thing that I've been doing with lay people is interviewing folks all around town, from Steve Mayo to Doug Lyons to Julie Smith-Gavin and Maureen Butte. And anyway, lots of leaders, Council on Aging, and just saying, what are the trend lines in Wakefield? Where do you see the town going? What are the hopes and the hurts and the needs? What's your biggest challenge right now, and how can faith communities help? And I've gotten a lot of great feedback about what the town could use and benefit from. Plus, we also want to build a structure that's not only green, but self-sustaining, that we, like the preschool will go back there. Maybe you put offices for nonprofits in there. Maybe you create whatever, a drug rehab program or elder services or whatever.
So you're really looking more for it to service the town, not just the church community
that's right.
itself.
It'd be a multi-service, multi-purpose building. I've heard from a lot of folks that mid-sized meeting space is needed for lectures, concerts, meetings, what have you. We're even exploring quite seriously about building with an ethnic church because they're running out of space. So Brazilian churches are growing very rapidly. There's a Nepalese church in our area. There's a Haitian church. And that would require to be very intentional so that we're not just being paternalistic and you can use our building, but it would have to be a
joint
partnership. And so the thing is that I know I am excited. I think many people are about all the possibilities. It's like a new start. And one model we're looking at is maybe a chaplain basically to serve our seniors and our elders, and a pastor who does church planting, church revitalization, that sort of thing. So the possibilities are endless, and we're just in a spirit of discernment, of care, of collecting data, of praying, of getting input from the national church, and so forth. So it's a really exciting time.
It's probably wonderful that you are an interim pastor, because it is a interim time for the church, because you are transitioning to a new being, as you would say.
Because I have asked congregations to answer 3 questions. One is, who are we, which are issues of identity. What are our core values? What are our bedrock beliefs? What's our heritage and history? Then the second question is, who are our neighbors? And we'll do that through interviews, demographic studies. What are our assets and the needs of a community? And the last one is, what is God calling us to do and to be? We can't do everything, but what's our unique niche? And that always evolves, of course, as the congregation and the town changes.
And where is the sprinkler system going to go?
Under the pulpit.
I'm sure the new church will have a sprinkler system.
Hopefully, and solar panels, and
green.
That would be very interesting. I like that idea
of
being green.
Well, I know, talking to is it Dan McGovern at the Department of Rec? He said the town needs a splash pool or a sprinkler, where kids can cool off. And he said, we can use a huge basketball court. We can keep that full for you. Community garden. I mean, it's a big footprint there. So
there is quite a bit of land there. I don't think I ever realized how much land that the church actually stood on.
Because the building was so huge, it dwarfed it. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. And what is your background, speaking of
well, I'm a bred in the bone Yankee. Samuel Sewell of Boston, a witch judge, is a great uncle of mine. And the first congregational minister that I've been able to find ordained in my family was 1796.
Wow.
But I grew up in Wakefield, actually, until 5th grade on Pan Boulevard. Went to Dahlberg School. My folks moved to New Hampshire when I was in 5th grade. But I've been bounced around since then. My wife went to seminary in Chicago. Then we lived in Baltimore. She did her doctoral work at Johns Hopkins in American religious history. We helped start a church as lay people there. Then I took my first church in Cambridge, and it was a struggling urban church. We did great work, but it closed, and I needed a warm bath after that. So that's how I started intra-ministry, and I really enjoyed it because I love taking people through transitions, and oftentimes there's high anxiety there, and I usually can handle that and manage it pretty well. But and you go in with a discrete set of tasks you help people to move through. Fortunately, I've been able to slide pretty seamlessly from one church to the next. I did sell women's shoes at Macy's for a short stint.
I thought I recognized you.
Yeah. Oh, what kind of boots are those?
I know. Yeah, in my boots. Yeah.
Yeah, you try to sell
terrific.
Calvin Kleins because you get a better commission.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
And Chief Sullivan, how about you? What's your
I'm actually from Wakefield, born and raised. Wakefield High, class of 81.
okay?
And I've been on the fire department for 34 and a half years.
Wow.
So I started when I was pretty young. And I come from a family of firefighters, all of them Wakefield firefighters. My brother's on the department presently, and my dad, 2 uncles, grandfather, and a great uncle were all in the fire department.
Oh,
So
that's impressive. That's impressive. Is there anything you guys want to add about fire? The
I
rebuilding?
just would like to say on behalf of the congregation, thank you to the town of Wakefield. It's been a wonderful outpouring of support. And 3 of the banks in town set up a fund for us and collected, I don't know what the final amount is, but it was very generous. We had a GoFundMe site on our website, and that collected like $20,000.
Wow.
The interfaith community has been wonderful in welcoming us, and of course people's prayers and support and well wishes have been really quite overwhelming, frankly, and very humbling. I'll tell you one story. There was a Lutheran church in North Dakota that sent us a bear called Bucky, and their church had burnt down, and the bear was a comfort. They would pass it around to parishioners, so they could hug it at night and things like that. And they sent us that bear with the story behind it. And we, in turn, there was a church in Warwick, Rhode Island, that burnt down on Thanksgiving Eve, and we got sent a bear that we call Fielding with the same story.
Oh my gosh.
So it's pay it forward.
Wow.
That's a really nice story.
That's a terrific story. Yeah. Well, we want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Chief
Well,
Sullivan,
thanks.
thank you very much for coming on the show. It's we wish you the best of luck with
Thank
your
you.
rebuild your new church, and
Mhm.
we wish you the
I
best
look
of luck.
forward to seeing what's going to
Yes.
happen.
Yes.
me as well.
Yeah.
Me too.
And thank you for watching Talk of the Town.